live and the event is being recorded. So I'd just like to start by thanking each one of you and welcoming you to the BCS EMBRACE event about gaming. The lighting looks a little bit poor here. Let me move this if you can see me properly. Okay, that's better now. So thanks again for joining us at this event. My name is Unzibe Ufodike. I'm the founding chair of EMBRACE. We are the BCS's special interest group that's focused on helping to make the IT industry more racially inclusive, starting with the BCS and also looking at the broader sector. We've been around for nearly 6 months. We've organized a few events, one talking about accelerators and another talking about incumbents within fintech. And this is our third, which I'm really excited about as a gamer, focused on the gaming industry. We also, within EMBRACE, engage with community organizations that are leading on training Black females how to code. We've also engaged with T-levels programs, and we're looking at engaging with another organization that provides education to individuals that are not in education, employment, or training, to upskill them on IT skills to get them into roles, IT support roles, level 3 roles within organizations. So that's EMBRACE. Without further ado, I'll introduce the host for the evening, Wilfred Obeng, who is a co-founder, CTO of Audio Mob. He's an ex-Googler, ex-Goldman Sachs, and an amazing all-rounder who is also our inclusion officer here at the BCS EMBRACE. Also proud to call him a friend, and I'll hand over to you, Wilfred, to introduce the panel and the event tonight. Thank you so much for putting this together.
Cool. Thank you so much, and appreciate the introduction, Inzube. I just want to thank everyone on the panel for agreeing to join. We have a very fantastic group of people on this panel, and I'll start with introducing, I'll start with Joe, actually. So Dr. Joe Twist, OBE, who's the Chief Executive Officer at Ukie, which is the Association for UK Games and Interactive Entertainment. And Joe has an amazing background. She is VP for Games and Accessibility Charity for Special Effects, Special Effect. She's a patron of Save Our World, a mental health and games charity, and she's a trustee of the Royal Historic Palaces. So in 2016, she was awarded an OBE for her services to the creative industry and won the MCV Women in Games Award for Outstanding Contribution. In 2019, she was named MCV Industry Hero and DevCom Hero for leadership in European games industry. She was also named one of the Evening Standards Progress 1,000 Most Influential People in 2019. So there is a lot, and I also give, when I get into the deck, I'll also give you a chance to also mention some things that we might not know about yourself, Joe. But I will then also go into introducing Ian Livingstone, who is CBE, and Ian is currently chairman of the Sumo Group and co-founding partner of Hero Capital, a VC fund investing in video game studios. He's also acknowledged as founding father of the UK games industry, as he co-founded Games Workshop in 1975, launching Dungeons and Dragons in Europe, Warhammer, White Dwarf, Citadel Miniatures, and the Games Workshop retail chain before embarking on a very successful career in the video games industry. He also co-authored Warlock of Final Top Mountains with Steve Jackson in 1982, the first game book in the Fighting Fantasy series, while also sold 20 million copies worldwide. He has also written 15 books in the series, including Death Trap Dungeon, Fighting Fantasy game books are credited with improving children's critical thinking and literacy levels. And then same thing goes as what I said to Joe. I'll also give Ian the chance to give us his full bio, and also something that we might not know about him a bit later. And we also have Fabian, and Fabian Obi. So he's a gaming executive from Unity Technologies. For those of you who don't know what Unity Technologies are, it's basically the development software we use to create games. Well, one of the I should say, to be fair, one of the gaming development softwares we use to create games in the game industry. If you're not aware, it's a bit like Photoshop for games. That's what you used to build. You used to build and make your games. And then he combines his love of technology with his career, and has a great wealth of experience as a salesperson and technology enthusiast since he was a young child. So he's completed a master's in biomedical engineering at the University of Surrey, and has been working in the software and technology space since. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to flip over to a presentation with the help of, I should mention, with the help of Ukie, well, specifically Luke at Ukie, providing some data and some statistics around the UK games industry, because I think it's very important actually that we almost recalibrate, and I'll give you a reason for this while I get my screen up as well. So as Nzumbe mentioned, a lot of what I do is around bridging the gaming with advertising industry. We're in my core role at Audio Mob, and it's often quite surprising when I'm having conversations with a lot of these advertisers with their level of knowledge and their level of understanding around the gaming industry and what the audience actually looks like, on who are the kind of people who play games. So I often, when we're having these pitches, they're like, oh, but isn't gaming these like 18-year-old boys playing Call of Duty? And I'm always finding myself having to to explain to them what the current gaming industry looks like and how it's changed over the period of time. So that kind of spurred on the idea of creating this panel and getting these great speakers to also talk about it, who are, to be honest with you, way more knowledgeable than me. So without further ado, as I mentioned, I'm just triple checking. Everyone can see my screen. I'm just making sure. Cool, good. All right, so Ian, if you wanna say anything that I may have missed at this point, do feel free to chime in.
No, I mean I've been in the games system 45 years. Joined it when it was in its very, very early stages, and was really a lifelong passion of playing games and turning it into a career which I will never ever retire from. And the industry itself is full of very creative and talented people who all share a common love of games and want other people to enjoy and share what they enjoy making. And it's grown incredibly, mostly under the radar. It's a $200 billion a year industry, 3 billion players, growing 10% year on year. And the reason for that, I think, is really that play is natural. When we enter this world as children, babies, we interact with that world. Play is a kind of natural learning tool, and we never grow tired of play. And even though society seems to think you should stop playing at a certain age or just assume it's only children playing, we all still enjoy playing. And as technology has advanced, it's allowed more people to play. And it was the demise of predominantly young boys in the early 90s playing games on their devices in their bedrooms, but now it's accessible to all. Therefore, you've seen how the industry has evolved over time in terms of the diversity in the content creation, as well as the people who are actually playing it. And that's obviously a good thing. It reflects society, and also it's just I think we're all very proud to be in the industry because of the content that's being created. And why do people play games? Well, it's because it's empowering. A lot of other entertainment is a linear medium. You sit back and enjoy it, but you don't have much involvement with it other than just that single enjoyment experience. Whereas games, you're given agency, you're empowered by able to control the worlds in which you're watching and take that participation. And now we get, of course, games with creating metaverses with persistent worlds, is massively social games where people not just play games together online, they hang out together in games. So we've seen this this reflection of the actual worlds of real worlds in games now, where an avatar is your identity, a massive multiplayer online game is your community, and creating your own content, user-generated content is your making. So games are really a contextual hub for life in an ethereal space. So it's no surprise that the games industry gets bigger. I mean, some say that games are just a passing fad. Absolutely not. Games are actually eating the world.
Let me.
I'm talking, of course, but
no, I was gonna. No,
I was just going to say, if you're thinking, if anyone's thinking about a career choice, games are at the intersection of art and technology, and the games industry did not have to furlough during the pandemic because consumption was largely digital and creativity was totally digital. Therefore, it was business as usual. And in the post-COVID world, if you're looking for a world an industry that ticks all the right boxes for the digital economy, games are just high tech, high skills, regional. It doesn't have to be in London, exports focused. The second you release it on whatever digital platform that exists, it's an instant export story. It creates intellectual property that has value. It's digital. And there's an awful lot to like about the games industry.
No, thank you so much for that, Ian. And then Joe, did I miss anything? It'd be great to hear from you as well.
Well, just before you go into some stats, because I know you've got some stats to show. So I've always just been interested in make believe and in role playing and stories as a kid, but also technology. I grew up in Hong Kong, and that's where in 1978 my opticians, when I was 5 years old, said to my parents that to try and help my squint, they should buy me this thing called Pong and make me play it covering up my good eye and using my bad eye. And as you can see, I still wear glasses, so it didn't quite work, but that was my first experience of games. But I started getting really interested in the internet when I was at university, because I was the first, in my second year we got the internet, and that to me just was open up an incredible world of fandom and people just using the internet in different communities. And so I ended up doing my doctorate around online communities and young people and identity. And I think ever since then I have fallen into tech related and entertainment jobs. I was a tech reporter right at the beginning of things like YouTube and height of Second Life, and then fell into commissioning content at BBC that wasn't allowed to commission games. Commissioned games at Channel 4 for education, and then I've been in this role for 10 years.
Wow. And then Fabian, was there anything I missed from your bio that you wanted to just share before we go into some of the stats?
I mean, I echo a lot of what Ian and Joe have said. I grew up with a passion for technology in general. I was a very early adopter of the internet, even though I'm a lot younger than them. But I grew up with the internet. I grew up with all the several evolutions. So the access for me and seeing how the access has improved across time has always been the best bit for me in terms of the gaming industry in general. For me, especially, technology has always given me the access to be able to play games from the start, as well as see how people have taken to gamifying loads of different aspects of their life. And there's lots of people who may think, like you said, to your point of people think it's only an 18-year-old playing Call of Duty within in their basement or something. However, realistically, there's an element of gamification that applies to most parts of technology within the current life that we live, from your daily journal apps to getting little rewards or goals when you're reading, when you have a reading app on your phone. So gamification, not for me as an avid fan, yes, I've loved playing games, but I've also seen how gamification has gone to apply to many different aspects of life and actually become entrenched in our subconscious thinking. And I think that will work to actually improve the general image that we have of gamers over time.
No, thank you so much for that, Fabian. And before I go into the stats, because I'm about to show a lot of different information and data, so feel free in the chat because we are going to have a Q&A at the end, to drop any questions you might have. And when you see some of the stats, you might have questions, feel free to drop those in as well. And yeah, and it can be directed at the whole panel, a particular person on the panel, yeah, feel free to, if you have any of them in mind, to start filling up the chat with those. But without further ado, so I think one of the most interesting stats for me around the video games industry is that the UK games revenue exceeded that of music and video combined. And that's the movie industry and the music industry are both smaller actually than the games industry. And I think this one was really interesting to me, and it's one that actually I dug up when I ended up finding this stat as well when I was doing a lot of our grant applications for AudioMob. And it was really fascinating because two of the biggest industries that the UK actually is one of the world leaders in is one was games, and actually the other one is music. So it was really fascinating when I actually came across that. And it, in terms of music, it went the US, Japan, and then the UK. But in terms of games, we're actually a leader. And a lot of people don't realize, like, for example, Rockstar Games, who made the creators of Grand Theft Auto, are actually a UK studio, even though I know a lot of their games are centered around, I guess, imaginary US cities. So I mean, this is a really fascinating stat, just in terms of the growth. And this was, by the way, this is by 2018. So growing we're literally 3 years on from that, and some of the statistics already show that it's going to be even considerably more bigger actually as the years went on. The next one, I think, and a really interesting stat for me again, is that by 2020 the UK games market is now worth 7 billion. So it's actually, in the space of 8 years, doubled from the 3.27 billion figure. And I think this sometimes helps a lot when, for me, especially when I'm pitching and when I'm talking to other people around, people kind of see games as like, oh yeah, it's just that thing that people do for recreation, or it's just a thing that's fun. But they also forget that it is actually a major contributor to global economies. And we're going to talk about the UK economy in the next stat actually, but into the global economy actually. And it's not just something that people use for just recreation, but it's also, for example, crossword games. So people like, and there's a big scene around the brain teasing games. So there's also very interesting application of games we can use. And I know Joe mentioned earlier around Pong as well, and using that for trying to train her eye as well. So the stigma that I'm usually hit with is that, oh, there's nothing really serious around games, or there's nothing really that games does to contribute. And I think that is something that this helps to dispel. And as I said, I promised that we'll talk about the UK economy more specifically. And what is really interesting is in 2019, the UK games industry contributed and generated almost 3 billion in gross added value. So, and I want to stress the added. So that's actually incremental to the UK economy, and it also employed over 27,000 people. And also, by the way, anyone on the panel, because I know you're all well versed in some of these statistics, if there's anything you also want to add to some of these statistics, feel free to also mention and jump in. Another statistic is now the makeup of gaming. So I guess the idea was, and especially when I first started, when I was a kid, we used to basically beg our parents to get us a PlayStation. And we basically we'd write these long, almost dissertation-like pages to our parents saying, these are all the reasons why we deserve to get a PlayStation, and these are all of the reasons why we think you should get it, and this is all the homework and stuff that we've already done, and why you should consider buying one for us. And luckily enough, and lucky for us, they would always humor us, and also I guess just keep us satisfied. Also always buy us one. And so one of the first consoles I can remember was the PS1, and I was very young, honestly, at that stage. And it was mostly my brothers playing, and I would just watch. I was always like the observer, this spectator almost. And that kind of changed into a PlayStation 2. And the reason I mentioned this is it was very console based until we got the Game Boy and all of those kind of consoles as well. When we moved to handheld, and then we had the massive boom of then the phones and mobile phones. And that growth has really kickstarted this global market split of now we're seeing 52% mobile in terms of the video games market. And we're also seeing that another interesting fact is we're also seeing that in the developing world, because in a lot of places in the developing world and also emerging markets, is that they skip the landline phase. So a lot of them move straight to the mobile phase. And what that's brought with it is obviously this idea of getting data and then also enjoying mobile gaming. And then we've seen a smaller subset of that then be consoles and then PC. And it's also been really interesting because this has also formed part of the reason for that shift in demographic from people just being that idea of an 18-year-old boy playing Call of Duty, more to now we've got gaming mums, and a fascinating study by Activision around parents and mums. And honestly, it's been critical, especially for me, in also changing the narrative for advertisers. So we've done campaigns, and I won't mention the brand, but with a well-known nappy or diaper, depending on what region you're from, brand that targets gaming moms with free nappies. So while they're gaming in mobile games, which is really interesting.
We call them shite catchers where we're from in Scotland. That's what we call them. But interestingly, and there's still a huge potential bigger audience for mobile, but in terms of mobile and smartphone, women over the age of 40 are the fastest growing demographic for smartphone and mobile, which is really interesting. So it's still on the rise.
And I will add that to my list of definitions. I didn't know that's what you call it in Scotland. But no, 100%. And honestly, it's been, I think some of these stats, especially some of the ones from yourselves at Ukie, have been fundamental in changing that narrative and making people actually realize that there is loads of different demographics. Everyone is gaming. Now the next stat, and this is really interesting because this actually happened over the pandemic. And so over the period of the pandemic is that App Store downloads grew by 35% to 3 billion, while Google Play Store increased by 38%. So these are massive increases during quarantine, during COVID. So it just shows that how many people actually look to gaming, I guess, as an activity for them to do, while obviously we were all in lockdown. Now, this is one of my favorite slides. And all of the sources are in the bottom left corner, is the time people spend mobile gaming is actually comparable to the amount of time people spend on Instagram. So it's literally a 2-minute difference. And people are doing this while, for example, they're watching TV and other stuff. And you might be thinking, well, 2 hours on TV is still a lot of time. But there's a really interesting next slide I'll show around this, which actually brings this into full circle, which is that the mobile gaming reach, however, is actually 2.7 billion people. So although it's 26 minutes that on average someone is playing these mobile games, there is a massive audience of people playing these games during this time. And it dwarfs most of the other, even in social networks, because we all know about TikTok and how big TikTok is, but it literally is almost 3 times as large as TikTok. And another interesting place is, when do people play these games? And these are some really interesting surveys from the Deloitte Mobile Consumer Survey. And there's so many places that is actually, it's literally all the time, really and truly. It's like once they wake up, there's people playing these mini games while commuting, which I guess we can all, I don't know a time I've actually been, well, pre-lockdown, I've been on the tube and not seen someone playing games. I actually can't name you a time in the morning or at night where someone, when they're on their commute, hasn't been playing a mobile game. And then the other thing is playing at school, at work, which is a funny one. not saying I condone it, but I can't say I'm surprised. And then playing during lunch, of course, playing while eating out makes sense. Playing while spending time with friends and family, that's another interesting one. I would argue. I can say though, sadly, I have seen that before. Like for example, in restaurants, I have seen like families with all iPads playing games. But well, I think it's also interesting. Playing while watching TV. Also, I think I'm guilty. I'll put my hands up and say I've definitely done that. And then while relaxing at home, and then playing around bedtime, which I think we can all agree on. So that's another interesting part, because it's often that people have this assumption that gaming is usually just played at evening times, right? When someone has just come back from work, but actually it's played all round. And this is something we also explain to our advertisers around the opportunity that you have here around targeting people at different times, around different interests. Like, to give you an example, like British Airways and a few other airlines know, for example, that people are more likely to do convert on a desktop or on another device, but they also realize that actually people, while they're at work and stuff, are dreaming about these holidays, right? I know we're just coming out of lockdown, and it's probably something you're thinking about. Actually, let me check my phone. What's the prices like for a flight? Where can I go that's on the green or the amber list? So those are the kind of things that people are thinking and considering, and those are multiple opportunities in gaming where you can take advantage of that. Now, another fascinating thing, and this is actually from research that we did at AudioMob in conjunction with YouGov. And it had 2,200 respondents. And it was very interesting that 58% of the mobile gamers mentioned that they're female, and also 58% were parents, which was really, really interesting in terms of, and it matches a lot of the other statistics that a lot of other people have done research and delved into earlier. Now, one of the, and this touches on what Joe mentioned earlier, and this is from the Activision survey. So if you haven't seen it, it's Activision survey around gaming mums. And almost, 49% of UK mothers are playing games and have done so for more than 10 years. So that is a really interesting statistic. And a lot of people, when I mention like, oh yeah, there's a lot of gaming moms, are like, wait, really? My mom doesn't play games. And then you start to realize when you look at your mom's phone, actually, there is actually quite a few apps and a few gaming apps on there. And I could attest to that. Now,
can I just add to that though, because that's why we don't use the term at Ukie gaming or gamers, because if you ask the average, particularly woman on the street, and ask if they game, which I don't even know what that means. Nobody says, do you film? To me, they'll say no. Whereas if you say, do you play stuff on your phone? Yeah. So that's why that kind of language, it's kind of, it doesn't speak necessarily to your average person anymore. So it's just, that's why we don't use those terms ourselves.
And I'm so happy you pointed that out, Joe. And as Joe mentioned, a lot of people, and we found this with YouGov as well, by the way, a lot of people do not class themselves, as you mentioned, as a gamer. And they don't see and another thing I've noticed as well is they don't class mobile gaming as the same as something as Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. And I guess as part of this, I know the phrase gaming will bring the masses in here and think, oh yeah, okay, I understand what gaming is. But I agree with you in terms of what people actually classify themselves as is something very different. And so no, thanks for actually pointing that out, and explaining why at Ukie you don't use that language as well. Because it's a massive audience, but people don't necessarily class themselves as part of the audience, which is also interesting. Then the last statistic, and before I grow into a few questions I have for the panelists, and then we'll also flip over in the last 15 minutes to also allowing people, because I think I can see a few things in the chat already coming through. Oh, I see one about gaming bubble. Interesting. That's actually a very interesting question. So the last one is, yes, the African gaming industry, which is another interesting stat here. And this is based on the, as I mentioned, in a lot of countries in Africa, they've skipped the landline phase. It's all went to mobile. Like for example, in Rwanda, they started integrating, in fact, they were integrating 5G networks like 2 years ago. They were really like trying to push the envelope of what they can do without having to have all of these like tedious like cables going through landlines and all these other things. So they just went, actually, we can just put up all of these masts, and then we'll have this ability to have a really good mobile network that connects everyone. And for example, another place like Kenya, everything is mobile payment. You can't go anywhere without using M-Pesa, which is their mobile payment service, to pay for something everywhere. And so they've started very early with this mobile first community and society, that gaming and mobile gaming just fits perfectly into it. So in terms of the next 5 years, CNN had a really interesting article around how it was going to increase by 12%, and that may seem quite small at first, but if you look at the population sizes and how quickly some of these economies are growing, on average, a lot of these African economies are growing around 5%. Like for example, Ghana, Rwanda, and then also you have places like Egypt and South Africa, which are leading the video games industry in revenue. And then you also have the Middle East, where I currently am. So currently in Dubai, and the MENA region is massive. So for example, quite close to me, Saudi Arabia, every person on average has 2 mobile phones. So mobile penetration here is absolutely crazy in terms of how many people actually have these devices and could potentially be a mobile gamer. So I guess that wraps up my stats. So what I'll do is I'm just going to go back to, I'll go back to this board, and then I will transition over to my questions. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Let me just stop sharing. All right, cool. Let's see. And I guess my first question, I'll start with something nice. I'll start with something nice and easy. I was like, so could you tell us, the audience, something we don't know about yourself and where your passion for games came from? I don't know who wants to take that first. I'm not seeing me.
I used mine up in the beginning, so you can skip me. I used mine up in the
I'll
intro.
skip you.
I'm happy to go ahead. So, well, I spent the early chunk of my life in Africa, specifically Nigeria and the Benin Republic, where I went to boarding school. And from early on, my parents introduced us to learning games. My playtime was reading encyclopedias and taking my toys apart. So I always had a gamification aspect to my life in terms of growing up in toys. And then the internet came along, and then flash games, mini clip, etc. And then the consoles came, and then you'd be able to get on the internet and play more types of games, download games that you can play on your system. So over time, I've grown up just being able to experience the leaps and bounds that technology has made over time. And I think that has played a lot into how I look at technology now, in that it's ever growing and it's currently ever innovative. It's never going to stop innovating and evolving as an industry. So not just like Joe said, we don't call anyone who play stuff on their phone, we don't call them gamers anymore, because everybody plays some sort of game to some extent. They just don't always know it. And that's definitely been true for me. I'm an enthusiast, so I've loved seeing how people have adopted technology over time. I remember having to dial in and wait about 5 minutes just for the internet to connect. So it's definitely amazing now seeing how wide-reaching it is.
Cool. Ian, do you want to tell us your favorite game and where your passion for games came from, and something that we don't know about you actually? Oh, you're on mute, by the way.
Obviously, there's lots of things you don't know about me, but in this context, I guess one thing you probably don't know is I play blues harmonica. That's my relaxation. But in the gaming sense, I guess that the thing you don't know is that in 1975, I came second in the British Monopoly Championships, which was held on Fenchurch Street Station. And I only lost it by about 1,000, whatever the domination is in Monopoly. I would have gone to the World Championships. I think it was in Hawaii. So that was very annoying. And it's like the last die roll, but that was annoying. But where did my passion came from? Well, it actually came from board games. I used to play at school Monopoly and chess, like a lot of people do, but then discovered American board games from Avalon Hill and SPI and diplomacy in the 60s. And then when I moved to London in the 70s with met up with two old school friends, and we started playing games because we had pretty rubbish jobs, and decided we would try and turn our hobby into a business. And that's how Games Workshop started in a pretty rundown flat in Shepherd's Bush in 1975. And we got the European distribution rights for Dungeons and Dragons on the back of ordering 6 copies, because that's all the money we had. But fortunately for us, the owner, Gary Gygax, was also working out of a flat, so he was very keen to have a European distributor, albeit only 6 copies. So we were kind of all making it up in those days, but we were driven by a passion, and Steve and I gave up our jobs to do it full time, but we couldn't raise money in those days, and we ended up living in a van for 6 months. But it was fine, and I think we called it living the dream rather falsely, but it's just great to be able to do something you really enjoy, and if you do, because you're going to do it well if you enjoy it, and therefore you're more likely to be successful if you enjoy what you're doing, and if you're successful, you're likely to be rewarded. But that's not the motivation for me. It was to do something that I really enjoyed, and I love being in the games industry. I like designing games, writing games, and now, at my kind of ripe old age, helping other people make their games. So getting long-windedly round to my favorite game, I guess it has to be Dungeons and Dragons, because that had such a big influence on my life, and it was the first real storytelling game, an interactive storytelling game, and it was like theatre on the fly, and it was a world that had never been done before. It was a milestone in games. It had such an influence on video games. Without D&D, would there have been World of Warcraft? Would there have been all sorts of games that rely on storytelling and interactive entertainment in the form it took? And Gary Gygax, who I knew pretty well, the inventor of D&D, his imagination was incredible. And he said he preferred the radio to television because the pictures were better, because the power of the imagination to him was paramount. And I think in games, I think it stimulates the senses, sometimes more the imagination, because we're all seeing the same images, but nevertheless, it's a very wonderful medium to sell stories in. So storytelling and play is just close to my heart, and that's how I got into games industry.
Can I just say, I find that the question about what your favorite game is really difficult to answer.
Yeah, that's why I didn't answer it.
Yeah, or with film, because my answer is always, well, it depends what mood I'm in and what mood I want to be in, because games are completely, as you say, Ian, they do engage different senses, and music can sometimes make you cry, and just like games can. So, I think there's, and that's only getting more sophisticated in terms of how games are culturally and reflecting the world around us.
Indeed.
I actually love your answer, Joe, and I'm going to come back to that especially that last bit you mentioned, actually. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to throw some quick fire questions at you so we can get to that interesting question around how games are going to change and reflect. So I'd say in a sentence or less, what do you believe is the reason? So we now know that gaming is bigger than the movie and music industry put together. So what do you believe fueled that growth in a sentence or less? What is it to you that you believe that actually was that fueling factor?
Giving people control. It's an interactive experience rather than a passive experience, and in entertainment forms, that meta addition to the experience created by people playing together is what makes the difference. It's that engagement, agency, and it speaks to Generation Z. They interact with everything through social media, through communication, through commerce. Everything is interactive, and guess what? They want their entertainment to be interactive too.
Yeah. Just to echo what Ian said as well, coupled with it being interactive, the barriers to entry now to play a game are very, very low. Unlike the music and film industry, there's either a subscription model or you pay a one-time fee. Whereas with gaming, there are so many different models for you to be able to enjoy your game before you even have to let go of a cent. And that's very attractive for a lot of consumers.
And I would also say the increasing, astounding creativity of game makers, game developers. It's a real skill and an art. Like, everyone can make music, everyone can record something and upload it to YouTube. Everyone can make a game. Doesn't always mean it's going to be a good game or a good piece of music, apart from when Ian's on his harmonica. But you know, I think it's that creativity and that experimentation. I think game developers are such problem solvers and creative minds that combine all of these incredible skills. So that just produces more and more different kinds of games that satisfy your needs as humans. So that also has fueled it, and it's endless growth, I think.
Yeah, and video games has transformed the medium of the moving image, hasn't it? It's art of new media.
Yeah, and it is, I think, fundamentally that social connection as well. Like you've got lots and lots of indie games that are like 2 or 3 hour or 4 hour amazing story experiences, beautiful works of art, fantastic games. You've got loads of games that are single player, but actually, you know, that playing together, just hanging out together, even if you're not playing, you're just sitting by the campfire, you know, patting your horse together and chatting. It's like that is amazing. And we especially saw that during lockdown.
So I totally agree. And then my next question is actually, so we've talked about this stereotype of someone who plays video games. So because we're not gonna use the term gamer, so someone who plays video games. What do you think what do you think it will take for us to completely shake the idea that it's that 18-year-old boy? What do you think we as the industry can do, or society needs to do for us to kind of finally shake that idea that someone who plays games is and it's more a male kind of experience or hobby?
Well, I think when you get mass consumption of this entertainment medium, it'll, you know, those myths will be dispelled. As you said earlier, you only have to look at any public transport to see people playing games on their devices, and they're not going to be always teenage males. As Joe said, female adoption of mobile gaming is incredibly huge right now and expanding. So, you know, those myths are being dispelled just because of the mobile penetration, and you're going to see it accelerate with 5G rollout as well. There's going to be even more adoption of games. It's a mass market entertainment entity now, and people are beginning to understand that it's not just about play. They're now beginning to see the power of play in people using games as a contextual hub for learning. You know, it's problem solving, it's learning intuitively, it's creative. You know, when a child plays a game of Minecraft, you can see how they apply the heat of a furnace to silica sand to create glass, which they then put in their world. It's kind of learning by doing, and they won't forget that. And effectively simulation, Roller Coaster Tycoon, you learn about the physics of the building the rides, the staffing levels, the economy of pricing those levels. These are real life skills that you're learning in a very enjoyable environment. So as people finally understand the benefits of play, and it's not just about shooting games, which by the way is only 18 rated games, and Joe will tell you is only around about 5% of games that are available to everybody. I think people will embrace them more, and you just see the enjoyment as well as the learning. You know, there's an awful lot to like about playing games.
Yeah. And I think there's there's a society-wide, which is stereotype and mythology around games, which is perpetuated by the media sometimes, and the laziness of some journalists who also just people I am still constantly astounded by the lack of understanding by brands and agencies. And I think, look, as a commissioner at the BBC, it was my job to be curious about content, to be curious about what audiences liked, what they were doing, what they wanted to do around a program like Strictly Come Dancing, even though I hated that program. So, you know, it was my job to go and find out what we should do to keep that audience, that fandom, you know, satisfied, that community loving the content. And I just think, why are you not doing that with games? And I think there's a little bit of confidence that needs to be given, particularly to the next generation within organizations, like just to break out of that mold and not to say what's expected, not to be embarrassed to say, no, I play games and I love them, and we need to be looking at games. I think there's a little bit of a parental stereotype as well, because they just kind of, you believe the sort of thing that, when you become a parent, you haven't got enough time. Yeah, your time geography changes. But as you see with mobile games, with the kinds of games that are more snackable, or, you know, in episodes, or like Fortnite Battle Royale type genres, the games industry itself is growing old at the same time. So we're delivering more different kinds of experiences to satisfy those different needs. So yeah.
And then
Maybe,
there's
sorry, go on, Ian.
I was going to say there was also another important thing is that, as far as the BCS is concerned, you can see how you can use games as a way of exciting children in particular to be digital makers. Whilst we as an industry, we fought hard to get computer on the curriculum from 2011 on to when it actually happened in 2014, and yet it still remains largely a dull subject. It still requires examinations and standardized metrics and of judging one person against another, rather than empowering people to become creative using computers as that creative tool. And what we have to do, I think, the industry and the BCS and other industries show the potential of what it can be done by learning to be a digital maker. And so moving kids from the passenger seat to the driver's seat of technology, from consumption to creativity. And no matter how disadvantaged a child might be, if they have these digital making skills and entrepreneurial mindsets, they might become a job maker rather than a job seeker. They can access global audiences through whatever device they have, and create goods and services and monetize those without all the traditional gatekeepers in the way of the analog world of monetization standing in their way. It's a fantastic way for children to learn. If they can make a game, they can be involved in eventually with skills and to fight cyber crime and or design some jet propulsion engine or whatever it might be. If they even be boring enough to want to work in a bank building databases, but these are transferable skills. And we're crying out for software engineers in the games industry, as is every digital industry. And while having so many children unemployed right now, not children, young adults, give them these skills and they'll get highly paid jobs.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to that. Sorry, Wilfred, from a Unity perspective, because speaking to studios, and that's something that they definitely lack sometimes, hiring staff who have the requisite expertise with developing platforms that they can use to create games. So to echo Joe and Ian's points, getting down to the educational side of it, empowering a next generation with the skills and the full breadth of knowledge, because a lot of people don't understand that the gaming industry isn't specified to just consumers and those that make the game in terms of developers. There are people needed for visual effects, there are people needed who are artists, there are creative elements that need to be made, there are quality analysis elements that need to be made. So there's an entire development pipeline that needs a lot of skills and creativity, and boosting that within the younger generation will be able to provide a platform for advocacy, essentially, because people will then see the benefits that it brings to their children, to their friends, and to everybody who just takes these skills and then flourishes in other aspects of their life as well.
We even need lawyers and accountants too.
Yep.
I love that. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrap my questions. So I just realized there's a lot in this chat. So let me move on to these questions that all the wonderful people on this call have set up. So the first one is, okay, this can get very big. So I'll say if we can give answers very short, because we've got a lot of questions. So let's just say like 15 seconds, a sentence. Are we heading towards a gaming bubble, and what will cause it to burst? I don't know if I should target that towards you, Joe. I
was going to say the investor. No, I think bubbles in previous times have had different circumstances surrounding them, and I think the industry's growth is going to continue in a very positive fashion.
Cool. I guess, Ian, as an investor, what's your perspective?
I see huge growth. Yeah, there's large parts of the world are not served by games or the technology required to drive games. We're seeing 10% year-on-year growth. I mean, 3 billion people. There's still an awful lot of upside of people to start playing games. We've seen the number of devices that are game enabled. We see how 20 years ago it was mainly consoles and PCs, and along comes Facebook, becomes a huge platform. Then along comes a mobile phone, smartphones become a huge platform. They get VR, AR, mixed reality. Now we're talking about the metaverse and platforms like Roblox coming up. We went from IPO $45 billion. I mean, these are creating enormous economies and games enabled platforms. And the thing is about the games industry is it's additive. Every time there's a new platform that comes along, it doesn't get rid of the old format. It just adds to a new opportunity for people who had never played games before to start playing games. So Apple saw that ahead of most people. They saw that people were often intimidated by 15-button controllers. They said, guess what? We'll have touch screen and swipe your finger across the screen, and anyone can become a casual games player. So I think you'll see innovation and technology drive new opportunity, and this bubble ain't coming yet, that's for sure.
All right, cool. And then the next, so this is one actually that I had, and I'm going to kind of merge this question into something I had, which was around, and I'll skip to the, I guess the crux of this is, are there enough opportunities for diverse illustrators, animators, audio content generators, and importantly, story writers and coders to contribute? And I will position this, I guess, to, because Joe, I saw you nod in your head, so I'm gonna send this one your way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, diversity of thought, of experience, of worldview, diversity of skills, diversity of background is so critical. It's the driver of creativity and innovation all throughout history. We have a skills shortage in the UK because the banking sector is taking a lot of our programmers. And we need more diversity to come up with these different ideas, these different stories, these different concepts that are going to satisfy this ever increasing audience and demanding audience. We at Ukie launched with some founding games companies 2 years ago, something called Raise the Game, and it's a pledge for the industry to sign up to help share best practice, and it's all around 3 pillars to recruit people from more diverse pools of talent, kind of far and wide, to create the best kind of inclusive and supportive workplace culture, and ultimately then to change representation through your games, what characters you can play, the stories, and so on. And that's, I think, a really simple kind of 3 pillars. So we're coming up to the 2-year mark. We launched that with our first ever census of the industry, which we're going to repeat again. So there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities because we need people in these amazing roles.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm going to throw one to Fabian, which is around perhaps the advent. So basically, is the advent of VR and AR, is that something that is any danger to become harmful to real life? So I think the idea is that people then kind of get lost in these virtual worlds rather than kind of consuming real life.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And I know Joe loves VR and the AR world, and I will share a passion there because secretly my ideal gaming experience would be a VR headset, a haptic feedback suit, and I can run for the hills and not leave my living room, but I'm still getting all about. That's a pipe dream, and when that becomes commercially available, sign me up. But to steal a pun, great power comes great responsibility. And this is true for all gaming. It really depends how you use it as a tool. Because VR, I think, I see great application in terms of learning experiences. Imagine being able to teach a whole school of surgeons how to kinesthetically feel to do sutures. Or for instance, how to teach kids how to do little blocks without having to have literally loads of blocks within a preschool. They can just plug into a VR situation and manipulate objects. They're still getting the same experience. However, they're able to use it in a gamified version or through a gamified means. So VR, yes, it has its worries, and I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of safeguarding discussions when the time comes. However, it really opens up the scope for what could be possible with games. And like you guys say, with the advent of mobile technology getting better, Ian said this as well, as technology gets better over time, the possibilities will get better over time, and therefore the safeguards as well will get better over time. So I'm very excited for that specifically in this space.
And then the next question is really interesting. It's one around what is the panel's thoughts around being responsible in gaming and safeguarding children against addiction, for example, the emergence of loot boxing and microtransactions? And I guess I'll send it. Yeah, I'll give it to everyone. But yeah, go ahead, Joe.
The industry really deeply cares and takes its responsibility to keeping players safe really, really seriously, because we are in the business of fun and creating fun for people. We don't want people to have horrible experiences. And they're really innovative in terms of the platforms and the games themselves, on parental controls and family settings. And we run a campaign called Get Smart About Play. We launched that with Rio Ferdinand in early part of 2020, to make sure that parents and carers and families were completely across what they need to do before they even get the console out of the box sometimes, to set up the family controls, because it's so sophisticated but easy to use. And it's the same with mobile. You know, Apple and Google, they do have settings. You know, it's like sending your kid out with a credit card and giving them the PIN number. You're like, don't do that. You can turn off in-app purchasing if you want to, and you can have that level of control. So we continue to innovate in terms of how we keep players safe in all aspects, whether that be around educating players, educating families. We also run askaboutgames.com, which has all the info and advice, as well as kind of providing guidance for people who are a bit lost in terms of what games they should be playing with their kids. Age ratings are very important and should be adhered to.
Oh, I actually have one. Thanks for that, Joe. I actually have a really one that actually I think it would be good for Ian to answer, is around any thoughts on the metaverse, and will virtual worlds like Roblox steal screen time for more popular games like Grand Theft Auto?
I don't think it's a question of stealing. As I said earlier, everything is additive. I mean, people have got a lot of choice, and there's something for everybody now. I mean, Roblox obviously skewed a lot younger than GTA, which is 18 rated for a reason. Roblox appeals obviously to a much younger audience, but it is a world which we're now calling metaverse. In fact, point of interest, Hero, the VC fund we started, is named after Hero protagonist from Neil Stephenson's book Snow Crash, which was about the beginning of the metaverse. So, you know, I think people do like hanging out in worlds, and as we said earlier, just playing together and being together. We saw what happened with the concerts in Fortnite. It's great to be part of a thing, especially during the pandemic, where you're not actually allowed to meet in the real world. So it was great to be able to come together in these virtual worlds, and they're certainly going to get bigger. Massively social gaming is going to expand, and I think you'll see in Roblox that the age will probably get older, and there'll be content created for an older user. So the thing about Roblox, which is so compelling, is that you don't have to be a coder. It's like a no-code gaming engine inside there. So it's quite, there's not the barriers to entry to creating content. So I think you're going to see it get even bigger. But there are also going to be lots more of the virtual worlds that people want to be in, for sure.
Cool. I've got two questions I'm going to combine into one, because you're both asking very similar things. And I think it'll be a nice one to wrap up the panel on, actually. And it's around the applications of games, specifically VR and gamification, to education. And where do we see that going in terms of as a gaming industry? And that's one I'm going to send it to everyone, because as the final question.
I think specifically for educational games, it has huge applications, because a lot of kids are very much engaged better when they're going through a gamified process. They might not always feel like it is that way, but I can tell from my personal experience and seeing it work in real life as well, that when the VR is applied to actual educational programs with learning and strategies specifically built into the games, it could massively help them in terms of their learning process and their learning development, as well as their social skills, because they're doing it in a community-based setting. And there's also wider applications, like I mentioned before, with teaching surgeons, or, for instance, creating a learning excellence center where people can drop in, get materials off of a virtual library. There's many ideas that can be applied into this, because creating a metaverse of learning would be very beneficial for those who used it in the right way and populated it with the right information.
Yeah, I'd just like to add the fact that games, I said earlier, is a contextual hub for learning and problem solving, and there'll be an easy mistake to make if you try and make games that are all about education. I don't think you need to. Mm-hmm. I think you learn whilst having fun. That's the beauty about games. So if you're playing, I said earlier, Roller Coaster Tycoon, you are understanding effectively how to run it's a management simulation. If you're playing games like Civilization, you're not just hearing about history, you're actually seeing the outcomes, what happens when you step into history. When you play SimCity, you're actually effectively learning about urban regeneration or town planning. You don't need to say this is a game about town planning. They're learning about it anyway. And so it kind of demystifies a lot of subjects, and it's kind of a cross-curricular way, a multidisciplinary way of learning. And having said that, my own Fighting Fantasy game books in the 80s, they were effectively a learning tool as people found the optimal way through these books through critical thinking and puzzle solving whilst having fun. Learning, why can't learning be enjoyable? And I'm opening my own academy in September in Bournemouth, the Livingstone Academy in Bournemouth, and we are definitely going to take principles of game-based learning, and we're going to have a lot of project-based, working with industry to try and contextualize learning. I can't think in the abstract. I'm not an academic. I think visually, and I think the application of visual context, learning by doing, and application of knowledge is so key to people's learning, and you can do that through games. But people shouldn't be thinking they're playing games all day, but they're understanding games-based principles within learning. I think it's going to really demystify a lot of subjects and make it a much more enjoyable experience. For me, used to love learning, hate school, but so we're going to try and make school a bit more fun.
When I was education commissioner at Channel 4 before this job, we turned down every single pitch that was an education game. We commissioned some social media projects, but mostly games. And because, to Ian's point, it was about a good game, because every game is educational. And I think the danger of misapplied and misunderstood gamification is that it focuses on external motivation and points awarding, which is not what drives people in games, rather than intrinsic wanting to. And we also did, so when it's applied well, it works. We did a few studies as well around, we run as part of our education program, which is all play-based learning called Digital Schoolhouse. We run a schools nationwide esports tournament, and we've had 2 academic studies done to show that being part of the esports team, and we open up other job roles around that, and playing the game together through this tournament, increased school attendance, increased communication skills, increased critical thinking, it increased strategic thinking and team playing, and also interest, not just in STEM subjects, but also interest in other actual physical sports. So, games are such a massive, incredibly powerful hook, and they are also the most powerful communications medium of the 21st century, bar none. So they really are the driver of the next kind of stage of the economy and of culture.